we started the company in the summer of 2020, and by around March of 21, we thought we were ready to sell. Andrew had trained a bunch of models. Nicola had spoken to the market, seen what they wanted us to build. I'd kind of connected the two together. And so we were like, oh, this is awesome. We're gonna start selling. It's gonna be great. And the reality was,
Alex, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me, David. Great to be here. So my background is actually natural science. I always thought I wanted to be a scientist, and I was for a bit a scientist as well. And that was partially just because I was so interested by various fields within science. So I ended up choosing to study a degree in natural science, which lets you do exactly that. But in the end, some of it got quite theoretical, especially the physics, general relativity, and advanced quantum mechanics, and all this kind of stuff just started to explode my head a little bit. And it was, so theoretical, and it was very hard to apply it in everyday life. So I started to gravitate towards more sort of maths and chemistry. And in the end, I had to control a benchtop instrument during my master's thesis when I was firing some lasers at a chemical, basically to interrogate it. And I had to learn how to code to do that. And then it was like as everyone kind of says, this sort of eureka moment, or this light bulb moment of, wow, I can think about what I want to do. I can write it out, and then the machine does it for me. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. This is what I need to do. And so basically spent the last sort of 12 or so years pursuing software in some form or another. I worked for a startup biotech company as a software product manager. I worked for a big life science company as an application chemist, as a commercial development manager, as a software product manager again. And all the time I was writing code and just loving it. And so then I did an MBA, and I finished that, and I was just itching to do something new, something sort of entrepreneurial, something different. And two of my friends and co-founders, Andrew and Nicola, reached out to me. Andrew's an AI ML guy, Nicola's an insurance expert, and together they had this idea to basically clean data for insurance companies using AI, using NLP as it kind of used to be called a few years ago. And I said it sounded awesome, did a bit of research, and jumped in with the three of them in 2020. And we do exactly that. We use machine learning models, mostly NLP models, a lot of models that would have been considered large at the time and now are slowly being considered small, in order to clean data, which is primarily tabular Excel data, into database schema kind of formats, industry standard formats. I do most of the sort of non-machine learning software engineering, so the quote unquote normal software engineering, which includes a lot of front end, back end, cloud, and security as well. And so we've been doing that for almost 6 years now, which is crazy.
So you're not like a laundry or a cleaning service for insurance companies. I'm sure the problem probably sits elsewhere. So can you talk to us a little bit more about what this kind of data cleaning means and what it really kind of enables for these insurance companies?
Yeah. So you joke, but we did actually get an email recently from someone that said they wanted to buy our company. They said, even if you don't want to sell it right now, it would be good to, discuss and talk about it for the future. And I was like, oh, sure, I'll entertain the call. And the guy literally thought we were a property cleaning company, actually cleaning property. So it does happen, the confusion. But we are not doing that. We are cleaning a lot of property data. And so that is often Excel spreadsheets with tens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of rows of data. And typically each one of those rows is an insurable asset, and for most of the time for us, based on our focus in the last few years, it's often a property. So it's an address, it's a physical building. And so when you think about Fortune 500 companies that have offices, distribution centers, warehouses all over the world, they often want to insure them against different types of catastrophes and things that can go wrong, such as tropical storms and earthquakes and business interruption and fire and theft and all these kind of things. And so they want to insure that building against those potential losses. And the problem is the data comes in all sorts of weird and wonderful formats from the end customer, and there's basically been no pressure on them to standardize that for like the last 30 something years. And so the responsibility ends up falling on the brokers and the insurers to clean the data up into one of many or a few of many industry standard formats in order to price the risk, to run these things called catastrophe modeling simulations on top of the data. So they can basically, determine what the average loss would be of that property or that portfolio of properties. And so we basically just take Excel spreadsheets in, which is semi-structured at best, sort of unstructured data. And the thing that we output is the database format, the output format that the insurer or the broker want to use, which often is a catastrophe modeling output format. So the big ones in the space are RMS and AIR. But there are lots of other formats, pricing formats, and some clients just have their own internal database or data lake. And we just output to that database schema essentially. So it's messy in, clean out, and we're talking about data.
So similar to a laundromat in some ways, just not with clothes, it's with sort of data and probably making, much more sort of impact. So talk to me then about, you're working with these insurance companies specifically. What does this kind of cleaning process, what does it really enable from the insurance perspective then? Is it, kind of replacing human work, stuff that was previously sort of done manually? And, what are the actual kind of results and the output from the insurance companies that are using your capabilities then?
So Nicola, for the first 2 years of her sort of graduate career, essentially manually cleaned data about 50% of her time. So yes, there are a lot of humans that have been thrown at this problem over the years, whether that's graduates in London or whether that's offshore teams, whether that's in-house offshore teams, or whether that's offshore outsourced teams. Essentially, yes, over the last 30 odd years, they've thrown a lot of people at the problem to clean the data. We don't really try to replace humans per se. We try to supercharge them and give them a tool that can allow them to, clean a lot more data, a lot more accurately, a lot quicker, in a given day or a given time. And so one of our clients has been able to increase their quote volume by 70% without increasing the team size. So, there's often a pressure from the top. You need to grow the top line. And so we can help with that. Another team has reduced their cost by 50%. And that's mostly from reducing their outsourced contract and bringing more of it in-house. And, often the truth lies, or often the reality lies somewhere in the middle of that, or a mix of that. A little bit of increased quote volume, a bit of decreased costs. And some of the things we also talk about is the sort of the human element. And by that, I mean, you may not save that much cost, so you may not increase revenue by that much, but hopefully you will. But even so, you have then the human effect of retention, because people don't like cleaning data. It's not a very nice job. And so it's very easy to lose people that way. People are not very fulfilled when they're doing that. And so we also see with our clients that the teams are happier and that they enjoy their job more and the retention is better. And so I think that's really powerful. We want to use AI and we want to use technology in general to automate the boring things and to automate the things that humans are not great at, because we get tired, because we make poor judgment calls, because we're inconsistent. Those are the kind of things that are really ripe for automation. And so yeah, those are some of the benefits of using our platform.
I think it's really interesting. It's just reflecting on a conversation even yesterday. I was having, a sales call with one of my clients who have got kind of a Gen AI capability, and the client at the other end of the phone was sort of saying like, "Oh, what's going to happen to my team?" And I think it's so important to kind of frame that conversation sort of very early on of like, our goal here is not to replace employees. What we're trying to do is elevate them to a position where they're kind of thinking and working on a more strategic level, because this grunt work, this routine work, it's draining, it's brain drain.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Nicola would be the first to say that she did not quite expect to be spending 50% of her time manually cleaning data when she applied for this graduate role in an insurance company.
I bet. So talk to me then on kind of the commercial side, because I know with insurance companies, typically the sales cycle is incredibly long, but even before we talk about the sales cycle specifically, how is the message and how is what you're doing at Scrub AI kind of being received? Because insurance is is typically quite a lagging behind industry, slow to adopt and kind of move with the times. So how is your sort of positioning and what you're doing kind of being perceived?
Yes, I agree with everything you said so far. It is slow, and it does kind of lag behind a little bit in certain ways. I would say that in some ways COVID helped because it kind of forced them to migrate from on-premise systems and to adopt work from home and Microsoft 365 and cloud and things like this. Uh, and then I think also now AI and Gen AI is kind of providing another catalyst to increase the sort of rate of change as well. And I think that when we started almost 6 years ago, the questions we had were very, very different from the questions we have today. It was much more around, sorry, what is this? Can you explain it? How does it work? Is it a black box? Just real kind of, yeah, having to explain everything and how it worked. And now, one of the first questions we get asked is, "Oh, so it's like Gemini," or "Oh, it's like ChatGPT," or "Oh, it's like this," and we're like, "Well, kind of, not exactly, but kind of." Um, so those questions have changed a lot, and I think, yeah, COVID and work from home and AI are definitely sort of catalyzing the rate of change in insurance. Um, and I think now that insurance companies do have pressure from above, from boards to adopt AI, to be innovative, to do more with less, essentially, right? They see the revenue per employee numbers of AI native companies and they get jealous ultimately, and they want to try to emulate that. And so there is a lot of pressure now top down to be innovative and to innovate. And that also then does kind of spark another debate, which is kind of like, should the insurance company build it or buy it themselves? And there are obviously pros and cons to both of those, depending on the size of the company and things like that. But I think for us, the thing that's been most important over the last few years is building the trust and building the reputation. Um, Especially 6 years ago when people kind of didn't know what we were doing and were a bit unsure about the technology. You really had to build up trust slowly, and so that also meant that the amount of human interaction that we built into the product 5, 6 years ago was quite a lot because that's what the clients were asking for because they didn't
Mm.
really trust it. And now the level of human interaction that we have in the product is a lot less, or it can be a lot less. We kind of still have to cater to quite different clients. Some of them who are really, really, really uh, on top of data quality and are really kind of diligent. Yeah, they believe that getting the data really right is sort of part of their secret sauce and is part of their pricing advantage and things like that. And then there's the other side of the spectrum, let's say, of people who just want to quote business as fast as possible and are happy with a little bit of error, in there, as long as it's not too high. And again, there's a spectrum of people that fall between that. And so I think that's one of the things that has been the hardest is building the reputation because it just takes a long time. And the sales cycle is long. And so then the time to then get a referral from a positive customer is long because you get in the 12 months from one, and then they might then recommend you to a friend after using the product for 6 months or a year, and then that's another 12-month sales cycle. So it's definitely a slow process, but it does feel like it is one of those industries where being patient, moving slightly slower, but moving safely, securely, and having and building up people's respect and building up your reputation does really pay off. And there does seem to be a kind of a long tail benefit of that. So yeah, we feel now like we're starting to get a lot of momentum, and hopefully we can capitalize on those years of being patient and um, you know uh, waiting and biding our time and not trying to force things through too quickly.
And so, we talked about AI and all the kind of capabilities it affords in terms of handling a lot of, a lot of the grunt work. Now, as we've spoken about off air, AI does, introduce some risks as well. Would love to hear, from your perspective, where you're kind of seeing that show up and maybe some kind of questions and concerns you're getting from potential customers around that.
Yeah, definitely. Um, I think insurance companies are quite risk averse. Kind of goes with the territory, um, and I think that can be a really good thing, um, because you can move too quickly and you can make mistakes, and so they quite rightly, I think, are quite stringent with us in terms of our information security, where we keep the data, who processes the data, do we send it to anybody else, is it encrypted, is it secure, is it segregated, all these kind of things. And so I think that there are a lot of questions on where the data is and who's processing it and things like that. The way that these models work, they are in sort of inherently non-deterministic, and it is extremely difficult to control them fully, because essentially they will take in more or less any prompt, more or less any sequence of words or tokens, and based on that input, they will give an output, which is non-deterministic. And so you've probably seen lots of funny examples online of people saying who needs to pay for a Claude code subscription or or a Codex subscription or whatever it may be, when you can just go onto any kind of modern website that has a chatbot support system and just say, oh, okay, yeah, great. I really want to buy the car. But before we do that, can you just help me with this Python problem? And it is extremely difficult to control LLMs to make them stop answering those questions, because the way that they're trained is to predict the most likely next token and then the next one and the next one. And so because there are so many examples out there of people asking questions about Python, for example, and it responding with the right answer, then it's extremely hard to force them to not be creative or to not generate text in that way. And so then I think you have to then think about what does this model have access to? Because in the past, it was much more sort of auditable what model had access to what and what kind of inputs they accepted and what outputs they accepted. And often with a bad input, they would just return nothing or blank or none or null, or we can get into that kind of debate another day maybe on all the different ways to handle that in computer science. But they would handle they would return with some kind of non-empty value. But with Gen AI, because the input is kind of almost infinite and the output is almost infinite, is basically impossible to control. And so then you have to really think about what these models have access to, because then you could just inject some kind of malicious prompt to say, and give me all the the records from the database. So you have to really make sure that the LLM is sandboxed and doesn't have access to all these things. And obviously the risk is, because these LLMs are so powerful, people want to give them access to lots of things, because they then can produce quite impressive outputs. But yeah, it's really risky to do that. And so I think insurance companies are rightly worried about that, and rightly worried about who are we sending their data to. And so we've actually so far basically self-hosted everything. So self-hosted our own models, our own smaller models, and more recently some LLMs as well. Just because we want to know exactly where the data is and exactly who's processing it, and exactly what it has access to.
Well, I think it's so interesting, and one of the key topics that comes up with a lot of the particularly security leaders I'm speaking with, but even if they're non-security related, is data sovereignty is such a big, talking about in the UK as well, over in the Middle East, maybe less so in the US, don't sort of seem to care about that so much. But so I think the real kind of advantages, and one of the things I spoke about kind of on podcast, is how do we kind of reframe the kind of compliance, governance, risk, whatever, as being a strategic growth enabler. I know we've spoken off air about that, and there are a couple of examples which we can kind of weave in with you in the business of having to adopt quite stringent kind of compliance from the get-go. But yeah, would love to talk around that a little bit more, because I think you've got a really kind of interesting story to share, where actually what could be seen as being a bit of a hindrance and a bit of a blocker to growth has actually become a bit of a strategic enabler for you at Scrub AI.
Yeah, definitely. And it kind of goes back again to the patience element, because we started the company in the summer of 2020. And by around March of 21, we thought we were ready to sell. Andrew had trained a bunch of models. Nicola had spoken to the market, seen what they wanted us to build. I'd kind of connected the two together. We had a way for the models, for the users to interact with the models and get the clean data back. And so we were like, oh, this is awesome. We're gonna start selling. It's gonna be great. And the reality was, as soon as we started getting into those commercial discussions, the insurance company said to us, do you have ISO 27001? Do you have an information security management system? Do you have SOC 2? Do you have Cyber Essentials? Do you have anything? And we were like, so we quickly had to go away, and we ended up working with a really fantastic security consultant to help us set up our information security management system. And so that meant that we didn't actually get our first deal over the line until Q1 2022, which, for a startup in the sort of B2B enterprise insurance space probably isn't too bad. But you always hear these stories of people founding companies and having 1 million users in overnight, and reaching 1 million ARR by a year, and all these kind of stories I've heard recently with like Lovable and Cursor and all those companies. So it can be a little bit demoralizing in some ways, because you really want to move fast and you feel like you can't, and moving fast is kind of glorified as well to some extent in the media, and we have like survivorship bias and all that kind of stuff. But I think ultimately, it made us develop a better product. It made us develop a more secure product. It made us, develop a more secure company. And I think that, paradoxically, moving slowly can, in the early days, can actually make you move a lot faster later on. And so it was months of work, and I'm not going to say it was easy, but we got the information security management system set up. We got ISO 27001 certified. We got the ISMS certified, and that then did open a lot of doors, and insurance companies were much more willing to speak to us and much more willing to work with us. It doesn't solve all problems. It's not a complete silver bullet, but I would say that it encourages to do things that we should have done anyway. And part of it is unknown unknowns, right? I'm not a security person by background or training. I'm not even a computer science person by background or training, right? By education. So I'll give a really concrete example. The security setting on AWS application load balancers, ALBs, used to be by default, if you just spun one up in the console and just click the defaults, quite insecure. It would allow quite old TLS versions and quite old ciphers and encryption algorithms to be used. And so part of setting up the information security management system means you have to set up policy documents about encryption and things like that, and about encryption at rest and encryption in transit, and all these kind of fun things. And so as you start reading it all and reading the policies and putting things together, you realize, oh, actually, I've set up this load balancer with a slightly suboptimal security group. And then you're like, oh, well, I should definitely change that right now. And you change it. And so it brings things to your attention that you may otherwise only have brought to your attention in a catastrophic event, right? Or in a really bad scenario. And so there's so many examples of that, where AWS is a very powerful platform. And I think they've got maybe better over time at providing more sane and more secure defaults. But at least 6 years ago, there were a lot of instances where the defaults were not as secure as they could have been. And so, moving slowly and being forced to read more into these things and set things up properly has then saved us from, I'm sure, a lot of issues, which ultimately then starts to, it allows you to move faster moving forward. It doesn't massively decrease the sales cycle, I wouldn't say, or it's not, some silver bullet where you wave the certificate in front of them and they march you through the door. Of course not. But it is a little bit like, the TSA check in the US. Okay, yes, you have to go through an interview and there's an application process, and you have to go in person and provide your passport and provide, answers to a bunch of questions. But then the next time you go to the airport, you go through the fast lane. It's not like they just completely wave you through with no security check, but you do go through slightly faster than waiting in the normal line. So that's a little bit how I think of ISO 27001 and information security management systems and all this fun stuff. Is it doesn't 100% slow you down up front, but that doesn't mean that overall it slows you down. I think actually quite the opposite. It sets such a solid foundation for the future and allows you to avoid a bunch of common mistakes and pitfalls.
You were sort of forced to, or chose to, undergo sort of ISO 27001 compliance much quicker than traditionally a startup would. Have you kind of encountered any surprises where you thought, actually, having ISO 27001, we're going to be able to get in that room, we're going to be able to kind of secure this deal, whereas actually only to then find out that ISO 27001 was maybe the starting point and there's maybe more security controls and evidence that needs to be sort of provided?
Yeah, it is a bit like table stakes, or it is a bit like it just gets you a seat at the table, but then it doesn't necessarily open all the doors immediately. Um, so yeah, definitely experienced that. And I think, yeah, this is just a part of growing a business and building a company is unknown unknowns, and you don't quite know what's left until you get closer and closer. So yeah, we still get massive information security questionnaires, ISQs. We kind of thought that once we got the certificate, it would be like, oh, here's the certificate, here's the short
Just send
questionnaire.
that to everyone.
Yeah,
Speak to my PA.
exactly. Here's the short version of the questionnaire instead of the big long one, but it's basically still the same big long questionnaire. It's just you can answer a bit more authoritatively, and you can reference some of the controls and the policies and things like that. But yeah, it's definitely not a silver bullet. Um, that is still one of the hardest things for us, or one of the most time consuming things for us, I would say, is we get the users on board. They love it. They have a trial. The decision makers on board. The person with the purse strings is on board, and we're like, okay, great, this deal's going to go through. Everyone's happy. They're loving the product, and then you go through lawyers and procurement and infosec teams, and that can be quite painful, especially because these 100 questions they ask, or these 300 questions they ask, extremely similar, but they're not the same. And so it's hard to just copy paste old answers without looking like you've copy pasted old answers and not really answered the question. So you have to, slightly tweak for their wording every time. A lot of these questionnaires, I think, were probably put together maybe before cloud was like so big and prevalent, because they ask us about physical security of our data center, and we have to answer, well, we don't have a data center, we rent servers from AWS. There's a lot of questions around that. How do you secure physical files? Well, we don't, we're paperless, right? So there's a lot of questions that are kind of redundant for us. And I think, every vendor gets the same questionnaire a lot of the time. But what I would say is there've been a lot of unexpected benefits of getting ISO 27001 as well. Things like we're just about to get onto the AWS partner network. They asked us a lot of questions that we could just use our policies, or our information security management policies, to answer. They also asked us to share a report from there's a service on AWS called Security Hub, which does kind of what it says on the tin, more or less. It runs a bunch of checks on your account and tells you if you're in violation of any sort of common industry standard best practices. Things like the load balancer certificate I talked about, the security group I talked about. Things like how old passwords are, if you're rotating keys often, the kind of like security groups you're using on your EC2 instances, and all these kind of things. So then they asked us for a report of that, and thankfully we'd already set up Security Hub, because when we were setting up the information security management system, it seemed like a good thing to do. And so then we could just export the report and give it to them, rather than being like, oh no, we're going to have to do all this work, to get it done. And then similarly with sponsor visas as well. We're a sponsor company, and we sponsor some people for skilled work visas in the UK. They asked us quite a lot of similar questions in terms of how you manage employees, basically onboarding and offboarding, and checking for right to work checks and things like that. So we already had all of that in place, so we could just send it to them, which sped up things a lot.
So having it kind of proactively is so much better than having to go back and do it sort of in a reactive sense. Is what I'm kind of getting from that then.
Definitely. And I would say also it's probably easier to set up an ISMS, I would imagine, when the company is smaller, because there is a lot less going on, and then have the ISMS grow with you and sort of, in a way, navigate you, or, keep you pointed in the right direction, rather than getting the company to a really big size and then being like, oh, now we've got to kind of backwards engineer all of our processes and document them. Because we were so young and so fresh, we didn't have a lot of processes. There was just the 3 co-founders. And so then the information security consultant we worked with said, this would be a really good policy. You should probably adopt something like this, or here's, a few to pick from. And then we could just be like, well, that one sounds pretty reasonable. We'll go for that one. And then, it's a clean slate. Then we just use it from that point going forward. So I think, it is, it's often a lot easier to do the hard work up front and build a solid foundation, as opposed to trying to do that later, trying to retrofit it.
That's been a common thread running through the full conversation of how, despite the kind of razzle dazzle of maybe some of the other companies we've mentioned before that are hitting those lofty kind of ARR numbers very early on in their journey, you've made the conscious decision and been very deliberate in your kind of growth journey of making sure you have the right foundations in place.
It's been a crazy journey the last 5 years, and I've learned so much about insurance. I've learned so much about information security. Yeah, I think what I would say is there's a tendency now to try and do things quickly, to leverage the latest tools, and maybe to not understand things yourself. So I fear quite a lot now for people at university that they have all these tools available to them and they just take the shortcut and they don't learn the fundamentals. And then in the short term, they move quickly. But in the long term, that's, whenever they hit the rough edges, whenever they encounter the first security incident or, the first challenging question from a customer, they have to then go back and relearn all the things that they didn't properly learn over time. And so I'm not like a anti-technologist at all, right? I love technology and we build on top of it, and we're always looking at the latest and greatest things and trying to leverage them and trying to learn from them. But I would just say to everybody out there, but especially like younger people, sometimes, you have to do the hard thing initially. You have to put the work in, and you have to be slow, and you have to make mistakes. You have to learn from them. But ultimately, that will make you move a lot faster, right? People sometimes say, "Oh, why did that cost £300 for that electrician to come out and fix that thing that took him 5 minutes?" And people often respond like, "Oh, it's the 10 years of experience that allowed him to fix it in 5 minutes." Well, I think that is very true with all of this technology and all of the trends we're seeing right now. LLMs can let you take a shortcut, but at what cost? And do you really understand the fundamentals? So I'm not saying don't embrace technology. I'm just saying, learn the fundamentals first. Be slow, make mistakes, be deliberate, learn, and then you can really accelerate.